his Skyfall answer is trying too hard to build suspense for something that, in the end, ends up just being his childhood home. It's trying to be Rosebud.
Skyfall. Skyfall.
It's the Rosebud moment of the movie. But it's not. If that wasn't said, if the site guy didn't say Skyfall in the beginning of the movie, you'd be confused as hell why we end up at Skyfall at the end of the movie. And I get it, setup and payoff, but it's like the setup is just a guy being like,
it's a
Skyfall.
nitpick. Moving on. It's a nitpick. Moving on.
But it's so significant. There's a difference between a nitpick and something that is supposed to be insanely significant. It's supposed to be. What is Skyfall? What does that mean? Like, be honest.
Yeah,
because I'm curious.
The reactions give enough mystery where I don't need to know. I'm like, okay.
But I'm curious. When the first time you heard Skyfall, what did you think it might end up being?
I had no idea. I was curious what it was. I didn't know if it was going to be an old mission. I didn't know what it was going to be. But that doesn't ruin the movie for me. That
doesn't
more
ruin
gives me more
it.
Intrigue.
But it's
so
like
what's your problem?
It's built up to be that it's going to be this. What is Skyfall? What is Rosebud? And then it ends up just being his childhood home.
It's like you're saying, oh, it's his home. It's just his house. But it's like, yeah, but what does that mean for the character? When you say that word, it's going to bring up certain emotions in you. And I think that's the meaning behind
Bond's response is great, but it's like, we're meant to believe it's going to be this really super significant thing. And then it ends up being his childhood home, which later we end up at. And I'm just like, I just don't buy the motivation to get there. It's to set up an ending that I don't, again, the theme of the night for me is going to be I simultaneously love, but at the same time, I'm cynical about, where I'm like, why are we here? Why are we at your childhood home? This is weird. There just isn't enough there to justify returning home, other than the fact that I guess Bond thought that he'd show up and there'd be a bunch of guns.
They sold a lot to a collector from Idaho or some such place.
Oh, I heard you died, so I started selling the guns and all the furniture and stuff.
It was shipped out weeks ago.
He doesn't say years ago, which would have been believable.
I literally just sold them.
Yeah. I just found out about eBay. I sold them last week.
Yeah, and messaged me that you got blasted off a train, so I just started selling them.
Yeah, but all the same, it's like, while I love the Home Alone setup, I'm sitting there being like, why is this your first choice? Is to come to Skyfall? Again, if they didn't have the scene with the psychologist earlier in the movie, everybody in the theater would be like,
set up.
This is random.
I'm harping on the fact that it's a character thing. At that point in the story, he is already surrounded by computers. He knows that like the digital age is like you can get anywhere. You know, we've already they set that up with Silva and all that stuff, right?
The assailant hacked into the environmental control system, locked out the safety protocols, and turned on the gas. All of which should have been impossible.
I felt like that whole thing towards the end of the movie is like, okay, where can I go that I can be safe, that I have some chance of protecting myself, and there's no fucking computers anywhere? Go to my childhood home.
We've been one step behind Silva from the start. It's time to get out in front, change the game.
I love the other thing I love about that, and I think this is what I was getting to, and then we missed this part. Even the final climax of the film is represented in this theme. So Bond, M, Kincaid fight from a Scottish castle. How old can you get there? Against a helicopter in modern weaponry. I like that because, again, it goes back to the theme. I love how much this movie supports this theme.
I like it, too.
So I don't think, I get where you're saying it's like it feels random, but I do feel like if you were thinking in the sense of a character, if you at least have that knowledge of like where, even like people would talk about like Vietnam or, the Revolutionary War. The reason why a lot of times people will say, oh, the reason why the Viet Cong won or why America won the Revolutionary War is because we were fighting on our home turf. I really just went to that. I was like, oh, because it's his home turf. He knows this ground better than anybody.
You can cite that to me all day, but for me, it's not set up properly. I think it's set up random.
Very well.
It is completely
It's not random because, again, we
random.
also know that Bond knows that he's being watched from every corner. He knows the best place to be isolated, and that's where he goes. I guess I get where you're saying where it's like they didn't have the scene where he was like, oh, your childhood home. Like, oh, did you hear that they're getting rid of it?
I almost would have preferred a flashback. Okay, so guys, we only have a couple movies left. And so I don't know if you want to. I'll take a drink for saying this, but we might as well just get rid of the law that you can't talk about future movies because they're right around the corner and there's only a couple left. In the next movie, it's like, oh, here's the rest of your personal effects that were recovered from Skyfall, and it's like we're setting up Blofeld and all that. If you're gonna do that, why not give me some flashbacks? Bond has never had flashbacks, but if you're gonna delve into his childhood, give me some fucking flashbacks, because then it's less random. Then it's like Bond is going back for a purpose rather than because a psychologist happened to say the word Skyfall a couple days ago. Or what if instead of a scene shoehorning in the word Skyfall for a rough setup, what if Bond had gone back to Skyfall after the train incident, so we actually see him at home for a little bit and establish Skyfall early on, instead of using it as a cheap revelation later? He'd reacquaint himself with Kincaid, maybe they'd go hunting like they used to, and talk about old times with Bond's parents. And when Kincaid finally asks him about why he's back, the writers could take the opportunity to better establish this digital versus real world theme, with Bond talking about how he used to hate this place but is now beginning to understand that Skyfall is one of the last places yet uninfected by this new digital world order, and that old man James Bond belongs here, not out there in the craziness of the
Brave New World.
And then he sees the news report about MI6 being bombed and decides to return to London.
Why did you come back?
Good question.
Because we're under attack. And you know we need you.
I get where you're coming from as far as that. Again, it doesn't bother me. I still like the movie for it.
I can do this.
The one thing, hold on,
I'm still going to bring it up.
The one thing I will say about the future movies, it's when you get into that stuff, it also makes me question, I'm like, were they setting this up for stuff for later? Or was it like inspired by that idea that somebody had? They were like, oh, what if we did this with this thing? Because I do know, like, the writer of this movie wrote the next one. So I don't know if he had thought of this stuff ahead of time and was thinking, oh, this is how it's going to tie into the next film or not. So I'm not sure. Again, I still like all that stuff. I think that stuff's great.